It's that time of year again, and Invincible Season 4 has been dropping since mid-March, which means we get to go through the entire season and break down every episode, comparing them to the comic issues they adapt. This season had a lot of people on the fence when it began dropping, waiting with bated breath to see how Kirkman and his team would handle some of the heaviest fights to date. But the real question is, how accurate did they stay to the source material? Before we get into it, something to note is that this breakdown will have spoilers for the show, but I'll have no comic spoilers for anything that hasn't been adapted yet. You don't have to worry about wanting to know how accurate a fight in Season 4 is, just to be jump scared with how the comic book ends. And with that, let's get into it, and if you enjoy, remember to leave a like, and don't forget to... Last season ended off on issue 65, and the first episode of season 4 covers issues 68, 69, and 70, skipping issues 66 and 67 to save for a later episode. We start with a sequence very similar to the one we see at the beginning of season 2, where Mark's just come off the battle with his father and lifelessly performs his duties as a hero while Karma Police by Radiohead plays. This time, while still in robotic casts, he's shown alongside Cecil, Eve, Oliver, and Debbie, with the heroes going through the same emotionless trudge, dealing with the physical and emotional aftermath of last season's Invincible War and Conquest fight. Oliver is no longer purple, explained by his Viltrumite DNA being so dominant it slowly takes over as he ages. Alongside seeing the funerals of the fallen and buildings being reconstructed, we're also shown that my boy Business Baby is alive and well. As I explained in last season's breakdown, Business Baby and his partner Big Mildew are a legally safe knockoff of the comic book characters Pitt and Tim, who were brought in for the Invincible War next to a number of Image comic heroes that had to be left out of the show for licensing reasons. During the montage sequence, we see Cecil soaking in a tub of some sort of purple liquid. In issue 84, we see Cecil sitting in a vat of purple goo before Donald comes in to share the latest problem. In the previous issue, while talking to Invincible, he explains that he doesn't sleep and instead spends a single hour a day in a puddle of goo that keeps him young. In a later spin-off series titled Invincible Universe, we also learn that he needs this daily plunge for more than just staying up all day. Due to the injuries we learned about back in issue 50 of the comic, adapted in season 3 episode 2, Cecil had to have a full body skin graft after surviving an eco-terrorist attack. In the Universe comic, we learn that without this goo bath, his skin graft also begins deteriorating, his nose even falling off onto Knockout's chest during a heated exchange. We're also shown that Britt is here to stay as a member of the Guardians of the Globe, a comic book character known for his own series of one-shots that began around issue 5 of Invincible. He's seen in the Invincible comics as early as issue 11 in Nolan's flashback of how he became a hero on Earth. He then reappears in issue 41, arriving after the botched Lizard League fight that left everyone but Rexplode dead. He was also one of the heroes captured by Doc Seismic in issue 48, and the one to save Cecil after his skin was burned off in the eco-terrorist attack. But in the show, he doesn't actually appear until the Invincible War, which was adapted in season 3 episode 7. Something the season changes overall is the vibe of Oliver. Last season, we discussed how he seemed more resentful of Mark in the comic, and dismissive of humanity as a whole, finding them to be selfish creatures, while also finding no problem with killing the Muller twins. In the show, he seemed more remorseful about that, and also tries to connect to humans more, even attempting to make friends on his own. At the start of this season, Oliver is shown to have grown tired of how often he's been running around being a hero, getting into an argument with Mark after he's asked to come back out after already spending all day fighting villains, instead just wanting to play some video games and go to bed. The show is trying to give much more gravitas to the events of the last season than the comics ever gave them. Everyone is still looking sideways at the 1 out of 16 Invincibles left that allegedly isn't trying to kill them. Many heroes are now dead and villains feel empowered, leaving more work for the heroes left. Comparing this to the comics, after healing up from getting his shit stomped in issue 63, Oliver is already back at it by the start of what this episode covers. It's just a little family drama to pad out the season, and it won't be the only padding we see. By the title card rolling, we've basically been given 9 minutes of recap and show-only scenes, before we get the first real adaptation, unless we're counting this fight against Rampage, which technically sorta happened while Oliver was still purple. We cut to Cecil asking Rex, Monster Girl, and Bulletproof to join back onto the Guardians ends of the globe, having previously left after Mark's fight with Cecil last season. They're reluctant to join, knowing that Cecil probably has plans to kill them all too if they step out of line, just like his contingency plan with Mark. But after reassurance from Black Samson, they agree to join back to show the world the Guardians are still strong after recent events. This scene adapts 2 pages from all the way back in issue 61 of the comic. While Eve is still in the hospital with broken legs, and the Immortal is having his head glued back on for the 3rd time, Cecil asks Robot to rejoin the Guardians, and Robot says that despite his problems with Cecil, he'll do it, and that he'll also be able to get Bulletproof and Monster Girl to join as well. Mark is also asked to join and lead the team, but rejects Cecil's offer, before Cecil makes known that the role of field leader was always planned to go to Britt. In the show, there's more surface level conflict than the comic, partially to pad for time, but also in an effort to stick into the viewer's mind the idea that Robot is not really on board with Cecil. Britt is also made the team leader in the show, with Robot arguing for a bit, until Cecil explains that he left the team so he doesn't get to lead anything. Now's when I just want to throw in a bit of a continuity error. Everything we're seeing in this episode is happening in chronological order, but during the montage, we were shown that this entire team was dropping out of the plane to fight some off-brand Godzilla, but this team composition didn't exist yet until just now. Not really sure why no one thought about that. We then cut to Invincible flying to the side of a cleanup crew, who he believes requested his assistance. When they say they didn't, he begins hearing a voice from somewhere nearby, thanking him for the death and destruction his Invincible war caused. Because of him, more people are dead, and therefore, the choking environment of planet Earth is better off. Then we get the TV show debut of Dinosaurus, the eco-terrorist we all know and love. He attacks Mark in hopes of stopping him from helping with the cleanup effort, explaining that every life he saves today is 10 more that die tomorrow from overpopulation and lack of resources. He bites off one of Mark's robocasts, and realizing his arms aren't broken anymore, Mark rips off the other before the fight continues. Now this plays out slightly differently in the comic. Issue 68 has no setup of a false call for Mark's help, and instead we just see him moving some rubble, only for Dinosaurus to attack him and start ranting about Mark ruining the natural order. But his explanation in the comics is just a bit stupid, and I don't mean in the way that environmentalists wishing for human extinction is already dumb as fuck. I mean in a way that's not very consistent with the wish for human extinction to save the environment. In the comic, he rants about how the unchecked aftermath of the war would cause food shortages and disease among the displaced around the world, causing mass death that would decrease carbon emissions enough to possibly end global climate change and prevent an impending overpopulation catastrophe. Okay, cool, that makes sense. But right after that, he says that if normal humans had been the ones to reconstruct the cities after the war through public work projects, it would create tons of jobs and global prosperity through unprecedented economic growth. Basically, at the same time he's an eco-terrorist who wants to see the world population decrease, he's also a socialist who wants the government to create jobs so humanity will prosper. He's basically a dinosaur version of FDR. Hear me out, guys. If we make it illegal for people to grow their own food, then make people dig holes in the desert to create jobs, they'll have the money they need to buy food. Airtight logic with no holes that'll make the Great Depression 7 years longer. During the fight in the comics, Invincible also loses not just the first cast, but the second one to Dinosaurus, causing Mark to recognize him as a real threat, before punching him into some rubble the same way he does in the show. When the smoke clears and while Mark is mid-charge, a naked man starts begging for his life. Mark grabs him by the throat and demands to know where the dinosaur went, before the man explains he is the dinosaur, but that he doesn't have control over it, turning into it randomly and waking up after it's done horrible stuff. He begs for help as Mark tightens his grip around the man's throat, until the Guardians arrive. In the comic, this part of them arriving is the actual shot they use for the montage, while in the show they just teleport in. He explains the situation and turns the guy over to them, and after Robot asks if he's alright, he simply says, "What do you think?" before flying off. In the comic, this is a good bit different in terms of the implications for Mark's character, as we've slowly been ramping up his darker tone. He's dangled a dude off the side of a building for beating Amber. He's killed the Immortal, not after a threat to innocent people like in the show, but after angering Mark by telling him what his future holds. He's prepared to kill Angstrom the next time he sees him after the Invincible War, and as far as he knows, he's killed Conquest. He was seconds away from killing an innocent man who's held captive by a creature inside of himself, with the question Mark is asked by Robot instead being, "What were you planning on doing?" Getting no response before Invincible flies off. In the show, Mark seems way less like he's being pushed into a darker direction than the explicit examples given in the comics. Next, we move to Mark arriving at Eve's parents' house for dinner, in what is about to be one of the worst adapted scenes in the entire show so far, to the point it genuinely pisses me off. But before that, we get dialogue about Eve landing a new client with their company Invincible Inc., a hero-on-demand service that they started last season. What we learn from this is that Mark feels weird about taking people's money, to which Eve corrects that they're taking corporations' money, and that they're donating all of it. The closest thing this adapts is later in issue 68, where Mark and Eve have a meeting with the head of Stronghold Prison. That was introduced last season under a different name, and actually caused one of the only actual continuity errors in the show, that being the GDA prison underground. They argue over a breakout incident that Invincible wasn't able to show up to help. Eve explains that while not in the contract, it should be obvious global threats will take priority, as to prevent a world-ending event that would make a safe prison useless in a destroyed world. And they eventually come to an agreement of 3 free months of service to make up for it. The next page also explains that there are no plans at all to donate any of the money they're making. It's all going towards saving up to buy their own place. This backyard dialogue not only replaces the prison negotiation scene, but the backyard conversation before dinner is itself a thing in the comic, and is completely different, having to do with Mark's mentality, related to his thoughts about killing the host of Dinosaurus in the previous scene. He confides in Eve that the new way his mind thinks about things leads him down the logic we saw Oliver using previously, that if he handles the threats for good, there'd be less heartache overall. And now we finally get to the extremely awkward dinner scene, while Mark, Eve, and her parents all sit in cringe-inducing silence while eating. Mark tries to break the ice by asking her dad about his job in the furniture business, before Mr. Wilkins says he actually got laid off after the head office was destroyed in the Chicago incident, pointing out Mark was the one who destroyed it. Eve tries to intervene, but he argues, quote, "It's not a crime to look out for your daughter, especially when her boyfriend has a history like Mark's." After dinner, while trying to help the girls do the dishes, Mark is called outside by Eve's father to have a chat while smoking a cigar. He explains that Eve is still his little girl and that Mark will understand when he has kids. Mr. Wilkins says he hates that she's a superpowered person like Mark, but that she is made of steel, having been in a ton of fights, but always coming out on top, until the fight against the alternate Invincibles left her completely mangled. He then points out how she wasn't even better by the time she had to go back out to save him from Conquest, before getting torn open by him. I already explained last season how I thought the adaptation adding Eve actually throwing hands with Conquest was the stupidest shit ever. She got fucked up by one Mark. She's not toe-to-toeing with Conquest. In the comic, she gets one-tapped. He hammers in that the only 2 times Eve has almost died is because of Mark, and that if you really cared about her, that's something he should probably think about. Now, all of this is fucking stupid, and completely deviates from the character of Eve's dad we see in the comic. Instead of coming off as a protective father during this scene, Mr. Wilkins is a raging misogynist, and the backyard smoke scene is supposed to exemplify that fact. Before this, the dinner scene is also different. In the comic, Eve's mom is quite the space cadet, as we're shown multiple times, and without even thinking about it, asks Mark what his dad does for work, to try and start up some dinner talk. Eve yells at her before Mr. Wilkins goes completely off on her mom, reminding her that his father is Omni-Man, the same person he had to fight to save the planet, so it's probably not his favorite dinner conversation, before calling her a ditz. For the backyard conversation, we hit the ground running with Mark asking about leaving the girls to do the dishes. Mr. Wilkins says, "They like it. Bonding time." Sure. He then goes on a page-long rant about how he wants to thank Mark for giving his daughter a chance, despite the fact she is not a virgin, and how he knows that's important to men. He continues to explain that he wouldn't have married Betsy had she not been a virgin, because he likes the feeling of breaking new ground, as he puts it, and that he's thankful that Mark would look past such an obvious flaw, though there are probably upsides to being with a more experienced woman like his daughter as well. It's a really gross monologue, but that's the entire fucking point. Some women on the writing team probably looked at this, saw it was gross, and decided to change it, because God forbid you write a character we aren't supposed to like to be a raging sexist in the adult animated cartoon. To add on to this, there's also an added scene between Eve and her mother while doing the dishes, as she explains to Eve that she basically settled for her father, and maybe when she's older, Eve might instead settle for good enough instead of being with Mark. After calling his wife over to watch TV, Mark and Eve now have the conversation about killing Dinosaurus' host. Mark throws in a line about how her dad was right.
"My dad is not right, Mark. He is never right."
Actually, because you decided to change this scene so dramatically, yes, he kinda was. You made the shitty character who's supposed to be a sexist asshole asshole, completely correct. Mark is with Eve, and that's why she's gotten hurt so bad, literally almost dying twice. And if he had killed Angstrom, at least one of those times wouldn't have happened. Another new thing thrown in is that Eve tries to make Mark a cup of coffee after he says he's tired, but it tastes terrible. They stick the cup in the sink, but it melts into pink goo after they leave. Wait, and why does Eve have to do the dishes if she has powers? She can just clean stuff instantly. This is playing into something much less touched on in the comic, Eve's powers being on the fritz. First noticed after undressing Mark last season, his clothes being all kinds of foobarred on the floor. We'll get to what it means a bit later. Moving on, we cut to the sewers under an unspecified city, where two sewage workers accidentally stumble upon the growing Sequid army, set up in the last moments of season 3. At the same time, a green lady wielding a staff named Universa has dropped down from the sky and begins to suck the power from everything around her, heading towards a different unspecified city. This is the beginning of issue 69, which in the comic is described as two world-ending threats happening at the same time, something rarely seen by the people of Earth. The scene of the two sewage workers stumbling upon the Sequids is show only. In the comics, we just see them taking over the streets of a city. Universa also doesn't start sucking the power out of things when she arrives. She instead spots a nuclear power plant and heads straight for it. We get another show-only scene of Mark apologizing to Oliver for the earlier fight, and also some drama about Paul, Debbie's co-worker and boyfriend, staying the night, something the boys assure him they're fine with, before Eve arrives and tells Mark they've got a call through Invincible Inc. that someone's attacking a nuclear power plant upstate. In the comic, this call comes through while the two are in bed after Eve spent the night, being distant because of something that hasn't happened yet in the show. The call is from Western Power, who aren't actually a client of Invincible Inc., but say they'd be willing to sign a 5-month contract if Invincible could rush over and stop whoever's attacking. And the two fly off before hearing from Debbie that the Sequids are also attacking in Houston, Texas. We get another show-only scene of the Sequids spewing up from the sewers before we cut back to Universa, voiced by another Walking Dead character, Denai Guerrera, the actor of Michonne, who demands the power plant start producing at maximum capacity for her to absorb. When they try to explain to her it doesn't work that way, she says, "Well, make it work that way," before deciding to figure it out herself. Next is another show-only scene. Debbie has taken Oliver to Art's shop to pick up his new costume, which has no more yellow, just red and black now, as well as full leg coverage. Besides that and a red mask, it's basically identical to the last design. He also explains why he kept the Omni-Man logo, when Art had plans to design a new one. He knows his father did a lot of bad, and while he originally wore the symbol to honor a father he looked up to, he fought in the Invincible War and stood up to Conquest while wearing it, so he now claims it as his own. There are very minor differences from his comic version of this suit, with his first one actually being changed more than this one, the O symbol originally crossing into the black. The context of getting the new suit is different as well. Instead of some more meaningful setup claiming the symbol as his own, we merely see him flying around wearing it after explaining a few rounds with the elephant tore up his last suit. He also changes his name from Kid Omni-Man to Young Omni-Man. We then get another show-only scene where Debbie recalls first bringing Nolan to Art to receive his iconic costume, which he first doesn't like, until Debbie explains that it'll help him fit in with the other heroes, and make the public trust him more. She's also very obviously pregnant with Mark during this flashback, and after pondering on this memory, Debbie agrees to let Oliver pick his own costume, saying that he's more than just Nolan's son. Next, we cut to Eve and Invincible arriving at the power plant as Universa begins draining the power. Whatever she's done is causing blackouts across the eastern seaboard, and if not stopped, will cause a nuclear meltdown since she basically bypassed all the safety measures to get max output. All of this is overseen by Cecil and Donald, who then focus their attention on the much more important Sequid attack, letting Mark and Eve's business handle the power plant. Mark arrives with a flying punch to Universa as Eve begins clearing the civilians. He asks why Universa is doing this, and she says her people will die without the energy. Mark points out that she's killing these people to get the energy, which makes zero sense. And after pausing for a moment, almost pondering on that point, she blasts him away using her staff. Eve goes in to try and fight, woman to woman, only for her weapon to disintegrate mid-combat. The first time it happens, Universa is thrown off enough to back off, not knowing if it was some sort of planned attack method. But after Eve tries to create some swords that melt away, she's left completely defenseless. In the comic, this plays out a good bit differently in terms of dialogue between Invincible and Universa. After she explains she's stealing the power to save her people, Mark simply asks why they can't just give her power to save them. But after she says her planet is 8 times larger than Earth and would drain the planet dry. Mark agrees that they should probably fight now. He also goes on a spiel about how he's not really a fan of hitting women, but knew it would eventually have to happen in his line of work. As he explains, he's trying his hardest to look past it, as to not be seen as a sexist. Universa also hits Mark with her weapon, which she calls the Staff of Leadership, 3 times in the comic as opposed to once in the show. Eve also attacks differently, ramming a chunk of pink stuff, canonically solid air, into Universa from behind. She then tries to create a shield, which turns into flowers instead of melting. She's almost hit by a beam, and calls out for Mark's help. In the show, this is when we cut back to the Sequids, continuing to take over the city as the Guardians are being briefed on the way. The GDA has put up a containment dome to buy them time to prevent the spread. Meanwhile, they're each equipped with a neural disruptor that'll shock and disable any Sequids within 10 feet, while their other wrist has a teleportation dart to extract any civilians after their Sequids are disabled. Britt clarifies that if even a single infected person escapes containment, the Sequids will spread across the planet and all will be lost. In the comic, the GDA didn't have a contingency ready for this, and Robot was only able to create 3 disruptors while they were heading to Houston. It's very much Houston as well, distinguished by its skyline, which is shown while the containment dome is being raised, compared to this lazy mess that just straight up duplicates buildings in the background. We then cut back to Eve pleading with Universa, who says she's sorry, but there's too many lives at stake. Mark jumps in and tanks the hit before rushing Universa and grabbing her staff, and after a second of holding it, he's electrocuted and knocked out. She calls him a fool, explaining that only the chosen can touch the staff, and before she can pick it up, Eve jumps in and knocks her out in a single punch. In the comic, it's more of a dramatic save by Mark, who quickly jumps in the way before Eve is blasted, being knocked to the ground for his troubles. Universal also notes how seeing someone sacrifice themselves for someone else they love touches her, and that it pains her to have to kill Eve after seeing such a display. This is when Mark jumps in and grabs the staff. It shocks him, and Universa is punched out before she can retrieve it. Meanwhile, the Guardians have just arrived and begin teleporting the populace out of the city. I did notice one error here, where 3 infected civilians are grabbed by Shapesmith, who then fires 3 darts to teleport them out, but there are only 2 sound effects. We're shown the Sequids bashing against the force field before we cut back to Mark coming to. Finding Eve has knocked out Universa. She surmises the power must have been in her staff, while in the comic, Mark is the one to guess this. The workers hurry to get back control of the plant, and Mark asks what's up with Eve's powers, her not even being able to make a simple cube without it melting away. Cecil teleports in to share the bad news about the Sequids' return, and offers Mark an earpiece, claiming there aren't any tricks like last time. Mark takes the earpiece and is teleported away. Because fuck you, we get another show-only Paul scene, where he apologizes for trying to dip out before the boys found out he was there, realizing they don't actually mind being around him. He then throws out the idea of moving in together, which Debbie is first thrown off by, before realizing that a future with Paul is something she's looking forward to having. We then cut back to the Sequid fight, where Invincible is told that there aren't any more disruptors for him, so his job is to get the host to someone who does, so they can be cleared and teleported. At the same time, Robot senses large life forms in the sewer and believes they should check there for any hosts hiding underground. Britt tells him to focus on above ground for the time being, but he decides to hop out of his suit to go look anyways, while his robot form continues above ground at the same time. We're also notified that the dome's integrity has dropped to 8%. In the comic, there isn't really a setup for disobedience towards the field leader, and instead, after showing the overwhelming odds on the surface, we cut to a suitless robot entering the sewers as a tactic to outsmart the Sequids, who thinks he's still in the suit. We also don't get any status updates to indicate anything is wrong with the wall. While in the sewers, Robot eventually finds an infected woman and zaps her away, just as she shouts that someone's behind him. Bam, he's knocked over. On the surface, they've cleared all human life but for the original host, astronaut Russ Livingston, who's now on full defense, destroying Bulletproof and Monster Girl's disruptors. In the sewers, Robot comes to, not infected, and is held down by 2 more hosts. He fights back by biting one's hand, giving him the space he needs to hit the disruptor. Robot then jumps for his gun and blasts the 2 civilians to safety before blasting himself, and with that, there are no more humans to infect in containment. In the comic, Robot instead only finds a single host being hidden in the sewers before he's jumped by a swarm of Sequids, but not completely knocked out like in the show. He is completely swarmed, but manages to hit his disruptor before shooting himself first, then shooting the civilian, both being teleported to safety. We then get a small show-only scene of Eve having to take an Uber to her parents' house, too afraid to even fly with her powers on the fritz. Then we cut back to the Sequid fight, where Invincible squares up to Russ, asking him how he got to Earth. Russ says Mark brought him to Earth, and when Mark says that they made sure not to, Russ simply says, "Not sure enough." This is playing into the idea that Invincible needs to take more permanent solutions to his problems. At the same time, Black Samson has passed his disruptor to bulletproof, while Invincible is pinned against the dome, whose integrity has fallen down to 4%. Invincible gets enough force behind him to break through the wall of Sequids and grab Russ, as Bulletproof tries to rush in to get the disruptor to him. The dome integrity has dropped down to a singular percent, and not feeling like there's enough time, Mark says he's sorry before punching Russ Livingston's head clean off, ending the hive mind and preventing a global outbreak. The episode ends with the Guardians staring at him, Robot simply saying Invincible's name, before it cuts to the credits. Now in the show, they still can't commit to the idea that Invincible is doing it because he's taking a darker direction. They use the show-only concept of the dome's integrity to help push the idea that it was a split-second decision that had to be made. Otherwise, there might be an unstoppable global outbreak. In the comic, this is not at all the case. There is no rush added by a collapsing dome integrity, and instead, the limited number of disruptors is destroyed, leaving no immediate solution, but at the same time, having no real urgency anymore. Now that the last infectable humans, Monster Girl and Robot, have been teleported out, Russ goes on to rant about how he's destroyed the only weapons giving them an edge, the disruptors worn by Bulletproof, Shapesmith, and Brit, as well as Robot's destroyed left arm that also had one. Mark then says he's been holding back, waiting for the Guardians to stop him with their non-lethal tactics, but that he knows how much of a threat the Sequids are, and with those non-lethal methods gone, they've given him no choice. He knocks Russ Livingston's head off, leaving everyone shocked. Robot then asks what he's done, saying they could have found another way, and that Russ was an innocent life that didn't have to be taken. Invincible doesn't respond, and this is about the moment that issue 70 stops being adapted, not to be picked up again until episode 3 of the season. I also wanted to quickly give my thoughts on the third Sequid fight. I think it's dumb, in both the comic and in the show, because the idea that they could possibly contain this all is ridiculous. The fact they made it to Earth should have been the end of the line, but somehow they only managed to take over a portion of Houston while also being freely roaming in the sewers, and it was all successfully contained. I'm not buying it. Before we can move on to the next episode, we still have the post-credits scene, cutting away to what is allegedly the same GDA prison as season 1. How can I tell? This little guy right here. We see Conquest still inside his metal prison, with nothing but his head showing. He wakes up, notes that Invincible is an idiot for not killing him, then immediately breaks out and flies off to report back to the Viltrum Empire. All while Donald and Cecil look on, realizing how turbo-fucked they are. A lot of people were upset by how stupid this plan was by Cecil, and this disconnect comes from the fact that his TV character is much more badass than he ever was in the comic. He stood toe-to-toe with Omni-Man, single-handedly prevented a citywide terrorist attack while sacrificing his own life to do so, and always talks with this commanding tone, compared to the comics, where the word I'd probably use to describe him is something closer to self-important. He doesn't ever square up to Omni-Man. His backstory is different, being tied up and captured when the bomb went off, Brit being the one to stop it, and there being no scene of him reforming an entire prison, just him rotting in a cell until he's asked to be the director. He comes off much less cold and calculated, and much more prone to humorous moments as well. Episode 2 adapts issues 66 and 67, revolving around Nolan and Allen after their Viltrumite prison break, all the way back in issue 55 and adapted in season 3 episode 4. 2 issues doesn't sound like a lot for a single episode, but that gap is filled by expanding a lot of Nolan sharing the true state of the Viltrumite Empire with Allen, in the comic only being 4 pages long. We start with the show only flashback to Viltrum, beginning with what first looks like an asteroid crashing down to the planet below, on the way burning up to reveal a metal device of some sort, which splits into pieces upon landing, releasing some sort of gas into the air. We cut to Nolan, who looks somewhere around Mark's age. He's teaching a number of adolescents why they're only statues of one Viltrumite, Emperor Argal, the man who made the Viltrumites what they are, a people of rampant conquest. We learn he was killed by the Betrayer, a Viltrumite who assassinated him before fucking off, his heirs being lost in the Great Purge that followed, which we heard about back in season 1 of the show. Nolan asks a child why the Great Purge was a blessing, and after hesitating, she finally says it's because it made them stronger, and for that reason, the universe belongs to them. The kids then shout in unison, "All is ours." Nolan tells them that their lesson is done for the day, and to leave to find food and shelter if they can. can, returning tomorrow for combat training, telling them 2 will die so they should probably bring a weapon. After the kids leave, Nolan is leered at by a man we learn is his father. His mother also arrives, and the 2 begin beating the shit out of Nolan. We learn this is a coming-of-age ritual where after you receive your powers, you're beaten by your parents, and if you die, you die. After stabbing his father through the hand and blinding one of his mother's eyes, Nolan has proven himself, but his mom isn't quite done, blindsiding and beating the shit out of him. She starts wailing on him and does one of the most insane moves I've ever seen. Nolan reaches up to try to stop her, and she's just like, let me just move this aside. His father eventually stops her, she calls both of them pathetic, and flies off. His dad is barely any better, telling Nolan he's an adult now and to get off his ass, before he also flies off. This is quite the society they've got. It's also backdropped by the enslaved class of conquered worlds that the Viltrumites use to do any manual labor, killing anyone who's too slow. Now all of this is show only, and in the comics, the scene is set by mirroring Nolan telling Mark about his origins as a Viltrumite in issue 2, which was then called back in issue 11 before their big fight. You can really see the difference in the art style over the years as well. But instead of this being his story in the comic, he's telling Allen about the truth of the Viltrum Empire. Nolan has parents, also show-only creations. We don't even learn their names or anything. We cut to Nolan, presumably right after his beating, joining the conquering committee. But right before he's shipped off, one of the other recruits begins coughing up blood, before completely collapsing. This is the start of the Scourge virus, a weapon developed by enemies of the Empire to specifically target their DNA, causing upwards of 99.9% of the Viltrumite population to die over the course of decades. While shiploads of Viltrumites are being dumped into piles, Nolan helps with research on the disease, before he too catches it and is put into quarantine. The leader of the Empire, who we haven't seen yet, is Grand Regent Thrag, who tells his men to kill all enslaved aliens on the planet who know about the disease, and blockade the planet to prevent knowledge of their weakness. Over time, Nolan recovers, making him one of the few Viltrumites who has. We're also told that more have been lost after recovery, because the virus leaves them in a weaker state for some time afterwards, which reduces strength and regeneration, showing us how someone as strong as Conquest lost both his arm and an eye, fighting another creature we'll talk about later. The biggest problem is, so few Viltrumites survived, that any offspring they produce would be inbred, meaning their species is basically doomed. Thrag says they will do everything to prevent this, and honors the billions who died by tossing their bodies into orbit, creating the ring that surrounds their planet. In the comic, this is all less fleshed out, but at the same time we get more solid numbers, and the timeline on things is a bit different. First, the Emperor is still unmentioned by this time in the comic, only that the Viltrumites had a civil war to purge the weak, and those left over united to conquer the universe. We cut to Nolan telling Allen all of this while both are headed to the coalition of planets, aboard the Viltrumite ship they took over after their prison break. Allen asks if there were so few of them left, why did they continue to conquer more planets? Nolan then explains that the real reason for their continued expansion was to try and find an alien species suitable for interbreeding with, Mark being the success the Empire was looking for, a crossbreed who not only had his powers, but is nearly as strong as him. Allen asks what Nolan would have done if Mark didn't get his powers, and after stumbling, Nolan says he's not really sure what would have happened. In the comic, this explanation is still in the flashback sequence, with Nolan specifically using the word breeding camp to describe what Earth was going to become. Allen notes that he himself was born in a breeding camp. This, we learned previously, is because of the genocide his people suffered at the hands of the Viltrumites, and Allen says he wouldn't wish that on anyone. In this dialogue, Nolan is also the one to demand he be taken back to the coalition of planets to give them the information he has on Viltrumite weaknesses. While in the show, this conversation is being had just as they are arriving. They sneak onto the planet during the night as to not alarm anyone, arriving at Allen's apartment. He calls out to Talia, his girlfriend, and upon him entering their room, he's immediately jumped by her. She asks what took him so long to get back from a simple trip to Earth, and Allen explains getting caught by Viltrumites and how they'd just escaped. She's jump scared by Nolan, pulls a blaster out from under the bed, and blasts him point blank before Allen has a chance to explain that Nolan's on their side, as he apologizes for the blaster shot. A now naked Nolan says it's fine. He's used to the hostility. This scene is practically copied over from the comic, with some very slight differences. The first overarching difference is Talia being way more sexual overall, their relationship being a small point of of contention in Allen's mind, since he's been indoctrinated by the breeding camps he was born in to see recreational sexual activity as wrong. In the show, Talia is much less sexualized and expresses her thoughts less aggressively. Alongside this, in the comic, Allen and Nolan actually didn't just arrive, and had spent the night on the couches outside of the room as to not wake Talia. And when she finds Allen in the morning, that's when she jumps him, telling him to can it with all the Unopan procreation rules and just bone her, before Nolan is introduced and she shoots him, calling him conquering scum. Nolan promises he isn't there to hurt anyone, and Allen vouches for him. Later, Nolan's been given an outfit to borrow, and the three head to the Coalition HQ to meet with Thetus, crossing paths with the Data Twins on their way in. Data Twin 1 expresses joy to see Allen is alive, while Twin 2, at most, seems surprised. In the comic, we don't actually see these two sets of people interact. Instead, the data from Nolan's books, full of Viltrumite weaknesses, are shown to have been passed on to the Data Twins already, and the two cancel plans later that night to focus on going through it all. Data Twin 2 also mentions that ever since Allen's transformation after surviving a Viltrumite ambush, he's found Allen terrifying. Data Twin 1 expresses how Allen's on their side, so there isn't anything to fear, ending with a distressed look from Data Twin 2, which in the show is the face we end the scene with. Upon telling Thetis the true number of Viltrumites remaining, he's left silent, Talia pointing out that he's dedicated his whole life to stopping them, but they're still his people. Thetis says they haven't been his people for a long time, and sensing Nolan's skepticism about his Viltrumite heritage, says he could perform the two-lock pull, but he's already done it for Allen and would prefer not to repeat the process. The two-lock pull is a Viltrumite custom of ripping one's beard off in a single pull to prove you're an undercover Viltrumite, since the customary facial hair is a mustache and no beard. Allen backs him up, saying that Thetis ripped that shit clean off for him back in Season 2, Episode 5. In the comic, Nolan is the one to suggest the two-lock pull, not believing Thetis is a Viltrumite, and explaining to the reader that it's how a Viltrumite proves they're undercover. Thetis says he'll do it if he really needs to, but it's not that pleasant and he'd prefer not to, before Allen vouches for him. Nolan asks why he's never heard of Thetis before, to which Thetis says he has, but the Viltrumites call him the Betrayer. He was the first to ever reject Argal and his rule of strength, risking everything to try and stop him, but insinuates that now there's two betrayers. Nolan rejects this assertion, explaining that he's only providing the weaknesses because of the friendship he has with Allen, and wants his sons left out of the fight as well. This is completely different from the comic, where upon learning that Thetis is a Viltrumite, Nolan expresses a fear that he had of being the only one to ever turn against them, and Thetis explains that's because his betrayal had been hidden, and all records of him removed, the exact opposite of what the show is going for, the betrayer being taught to Viltrumites since youth. And again, there is no conflict with Nolan joining the coalitions and the war against the Viltrumites in the comic. He's down to clown from the jump. The subject moves to a list of Viltrumite weaknesses, and the three are tasked with going and collecting them. It should also be noted, Talia is not here during any of these scenes. In the comic, she's practically a nothing character who only stays at home to fuck Allen. They decide to take the most busted up piece of shit in the entire coalition for their mission, as to not raise suspicion, a vessel known as the Venture. The Venture and its crew are a spoof of Star Trek The Next Generation. Captain Piquel is a spoof of Captain Picard, and the other spoofs include Warg, Download, and Tuva. In the comic, the two don't actually start their journey by taking the ship, though it is first seen much earlier, back in issue 9. The issue starts with Allen rushing to Earth to tell Invincible that the planet is marked for Viltrumite invasion, but on the way, he stumbles upon the ship about to be vaporized by a star they're stuck near. He saves the ship and continues rushing to Earth. Captain Piquel can also be seen again in the background of Allen's backstory in issue 23, but doesn't show up again until partway through this endeavor, spanning issues 66 and 67. Their first stop will be to collect the Infinity Ray, the weapon of Space Racer, a foe Nolan defeated long before making his way to Earth. In the comic, this one is apparently not too far from Telescria, so Nolan sees it as a warm-up and the two fly over there themselves. In the show, since the journey is going to be a long one, the captain tells them to settle into their quarters and get comfy. Nolan has to sleep on the couch, but says it's fine because he's slept in far worse places than this. And then we cut to him desperately clutching pillows in his ears to try to drown out the endless sex Allen and Talia are having in the next room. This is a bit pulled straight from the comic, but the context has been changed from Nolan having to sleep in Allen's apartment for a few weeks to the ship's quarters. It's a joke that happens twice in the comic and will happen a few more times in the episode. The ship arrives at an asteroid field, and after more incompetence by the captain leads to further ship damage, Nolan and Allen decide to fly in alone while they hold back. Using a coded message Nolan wrote in one of his books, which are the numbers of words and paragraphs of a specific chapter, they find the asteroid housing the Infinity Ray. In the comic, there's a bit more math Nolan does, needing to calculate the drift of the asteroid field, named the Nebuloid Belt, over the 100 years it's been since he defeated the Space Racer. But the method of coding is the same, being the words and paragraphs in his book housing the coordinates. In both the show and the comic, Nolan explains he didn't actually defeat the Space Racer, whose gun was bonded to him, flying back whenever anyone that wasn't him touched it. Instead, he buried the Space Racer alive, leaving him to die under the rubble, while leaving his gun exactly where it was dropped, to avoid it flying back to the Space Racer and giving him a chance to escape. The show expands on this a tad bit, noting that he specifically didn't kill the Space Racer when fighting him due to concerns that his death would cause the weapon to self-destruct, and that he assumed the bond to it would break after his natural death. When Nolan goes to touch the gun, however, it flies back into the rubble, and he guesses that it's still bonded to the Space Racer's corpse. They begin to dig his body out, only to find him perfectly alive and healthy, absolutely pissed to see Nolan. He fires the Infinity Ray at Nolan, but Allen pushes him out of the way in time to prevent a hit, the beam heading off into space for the rest of time. They try and subdue Space Racer before he can fire again, but he gets another shot off, missing Allen and Nolan, and destroying the asteroid. While Allen is trying not to get crushed, Space Racer fires again, missing due to Nolan's intervention. Space Racer then yells, "To me," which causes his space motorcycle to zoom in and knock Nolan away. In the comic, this fight is a lot shorter, with Space Racer only managing to fire a single shot while Nolan is trying to subdue him, barely missing Allen. That first and final shot causes the asteroid to break up, and after flying away from the debris, Space Racer calls his motorcycle to him and holds Nolan at gunpoint. Nolan tells him not to shoot, and the Space Racer asks what Nolan could possibly say that he'd want to hear. In the show, Allen is the one who tells Space Racer to wait, and after being asked the same question, Nolan says they didn't come to fight, with Allen saying that they thought he was already dead. The Space Racer says that means they must have come for his weapon, but Allen explains that was the plan, but now that they know he's alive, they instead want his help to stop the Viltrumites, explaining how Nolan's turned on them and is working to redeem himself of his crimes. Nolan even works up an apology to Space Racer for leaving him buried alone in darkness for 100 years, and this apology is enough to show Space Racer that there's something different about Nolan now. He asks if there's food on their ship, and Allen says there is, but he also has some Kazlok on him.
I was buried for 100 years, not 1,000.
This is one of the funniest lines in the entire show to me, bro. Oh my god. In the comic, while just leaving Telescria in issue 66, Allen offers some Kazlok to Nolan, who passes on it. Then after their fight, Space Racer asks if they have any food. There is no spaceship with food nearby, and when offered Kazlok, he too declines, instead being willing to follow them all the way back to the coalition of planets instead. In the show, Nolan also passes on it after some is offered to Space Racer. The next scene shows the Space Racer riding off towards the coalition. Not yet convinced to join, but Talia believes Thetis can persuade him. Nolan is certain Space Racer will join them, believing his nature as a crusader from back in the day, added to his hatred of Viltrumites Nolan himself caused, would be enough. In the comic, they all head back to Telescria, and while Space Racer is getting a physical checkup, Thetis explains he's cautious but willing to join them. With their first mission completed, they need 2 days of downtime before a crew will be ready to assist with the next mission, and Allen says Nolan can crash at his place until then. This is when the first sex joke happens, though there's actual dialogue of Allen asking Nolan if they're keeping him up. He lies and says no, and the two eventually start going at it again. Their next stop is to collect a large species of bug called Sinlak beetles. Nolan explains their shells produce a compound that makes Viltrumites vulnerable to physical injury. His mission was to exterminate them, which appears to have failed. In the comic, this isn't their second mission out. In order, it's their third, and only shown in a single panel alongside 5 other missions. There's also a difference in what makes this compound. Instead of it being the beetles themselves, it was a plant called Claxus, which is poisonous to Viltrumites. Nolan says it's impossible to stop this plant from growing, needing almost no light or water, so they instead infested the planet with Sinlak beetles to eat the plant faster than it can grow, with the beetles themselves almost being impossible to exterminate. The plan is still, however, to extract the poison from the beetles themselves, so the show has simplified this into the bugs just always being the poison, and the plan is to make darts out of it. We then cut to another another scene of Nolan trying to drown out Allen and Talia's moaning, before cutting to a desert planet covered in skeletons. Nolan explains that these unnamed majestic creatures were both intelligent and deadly, and that the Viltrumites killed them by moving the planet closer to their sun, evaporating all the water. In the comic, we get no specifics like that, only a single panel of Nolan saying he did his job too well, seeing the skeletons laying in the sand. I do not believe these creatures have a name. If I'm wrong though, let me know in the comments. The two fly off and we get another Nolan trying to sleep gag, before cutting to him and Allen being held at gunpoint by two tech-suited individuals. These are Geldarians, a race of physically weak aliens who make up for it with a Blue Beetle-esque armor they bond to at birth. They too are part of the coalition of planets, but are obviously not aware of the secret mission involving a Viltrumite collecting weaknesses. Nolan explains that the Viltrumites didn't directly try to attack Geldaria because they were too strong for their reduced numbers, instead hiring the Kresh to do it, something we're actually shown in issue 11 of the comic. After Nolan apologizes to them, they say they can't spare any of their recovering forces from the homeworld, but that there is a Geldarian warrior on Earth they could contact, Tech Jacket. Tech Jacket is another Image Comics character who actually released months before the first issue of Invincible came out. Zach Thompson was a normal boy that stumbled upon a dying Geldarian, whose ship was set to self-destruct after crashing on Earth. Not wanting his last act to cause the death of an innocent bystander, he passed his suit onto Zach to save him, permanently bonding him to the suit. Because humans are biologically much stronger, the suit makes him exponentially stronger than any of the Geldarians. The Kresh is a race of aliens who can't exist outside of their suits, because of the gravity and makeup of their homeworld. If their suit is breached, they basically die by turning into a gas. Zach, who takes the moniker of the suit he wears, Tech Jacket, defeats the entire Kresh army, ending a centuries-long war in like a single day. In the show, we first see Tech Jacket during the Invincible War, though Tech Jacket only kills a single Invincible, Viltrumite Mark, while in the comic, he kills two, shown in the 2014 spin-off series Tech Jacket Digital. In the comic, instead of running into two Geldarians off in space above the planet, Nolan and Allen meet with their leader, as well as the girl that Tech Jacket is dating. Sorta dating? I don't know. Since Tech Jacket is on Earth, they decide to handle the other weaknesses that are closer. And after another sex joke, we cut to Nolan and Allen approaching the Leonine, a race of lion-like creatures in hopes of finding Battle Beast, who helped them escape from prison and who is bloodthirsty for Viltrumite combat. They simply say they'll find him wherever blood and fire are, and that's enough information for them. In the comic, this is another singular panel, the leader of the planet telling them of Battle Beast's addiction to conflict, having left the planet long ago in search of a worthy foe. Their leader hasn't even met Battle Beast, but says he hopes one day their champion will return. And another sex joke. Okay guys, it's kinda getting old. The writers agree because Nolan leaves the room, unable to stand it anymore, only to discover there are a ton of other perfectly suitable sleeping quarters on the ship. He confronts the captain, pissed that he'd had to listen to Allen and Talia fucking for a week straight, to which Captain Piquel explains he thought they were in some sort of three-way relationship for some reason. He spares the captain and goes to find a new room. In the comic, during one of these scenes, we're instead told that Nolan is eventually going to be moving out in like a week, having been too busy with missions to find his own place. Next, we move to the collecting of Ragnars, a species of lizard-like creatures that even Viltrumites are afraid of, Nolan being the only survivor of the last attempt to exterminate them. This means that Conquest was on a different excursion when he got foobarred by them, after recovering from the Scourge virus. Nolan explains their solution to the Ragnar was to put a solar disk in front of their planet, cutting off the heat supply to the entire solar system, and freezing the planet over, while also killing two other sprouting civilizations on different planets in the process. The two other civilizations is a show-only addition to hammer in how shitty the Viltrumites are. In the comic, this is also the second mission they go on, and the one that requires Captain Piquel's ship, the plan being to bring back frozen Ragnars to use as weapons somehow. Once on the planet, they make note of the insane gravity, Nolan explaining that's how the Ragnar are so strong. He radios to Talia that they'll need to move the solar disk to thaw the ice enough to actually find some frozen Ragnar, and when she tells the captain he stops her mid-sentence, says he owes Nolan for the earlier bedroom mishap, and orders download to fire proton missiles at the disk, destroying it. Nolan yells back that he told them to move the disk, not remove it, and after learning it was completely destroyed, he says they need to move quick or they're toast. They find a Ragnar and try to get it back up to the ship before it thaws, but mid-transport, it breaks out and begins attacking Nolan, slamming him back to the ground. More are seen beginning to thaw, as Allen is attacked by one. Nolan tries to body slam it off of him, but it barely does anything. Allen thinks he has it handled, but Nolan says it's just because they're barely entirely unfrozen. Once they're fully thawed and warmed, neither of them would stand a chance, so they need to leave now. They try and fly off, the strong gravity making them slower, and both are tackled by Ragnar. After a struggle, they're almost able to escape again until Nolan is grabbed, being pulled back down to the surface, telling Allen to just leave him. While this is happening, Talia strong arms control of the ship, and just as Allen and Nolan are getting turbo fucked, we shoehorn in the dumbest solution in the entire show. Talia takes the ship, flies it overhead to block the sun, and the Ragnar begin freezing again. Bruh. This ship is small as fuck. It would not block enough of the sun to freeze them over. Then again, I have an issue with the wimpy torpedoes, which apparently destroyed a disc that was supposedly blocking off the entire sun, especially since in the comic, the disc was most likely fairly close to the planet and meant to only block light from it alone. Think like a solar eclipse from the moon, but the moon is a lot larger, and instead of rotating around the planet, it flies in its own orbit to constantly block the sun. In the show, it's supposedly big enough to block the sun off from the entire solar system, killing 2 civilizations on different planets as well. Either way, blocking the sun with a single small ship is not working in any universe. When the two get back on the bridge, Captain Piquel tries to downplay this fuck up, as Nolan stands ready to kill him. A mutiny is started, and Talia is now the captain. Like I explained, Talia isn't a part of the mission in the comics. Captain Piquel still blows up the sun disk, but it should also be noted that unlike in the show, Nolan does in fact say to remove the sun disk, not move it, but later claims he said move. Both of these are better than what actually happened though, it being destroyed. Allen and Nolan also struggle in a similar fashion, but one that doesn't include the last lurch that required Talia to save them, instead escaping and flying back to the Coalition on their own. Nolan saying if he gets on that ship, he's probably going to tear it in half. We get a show-only scene where Allen finds Nolan in the cargo hold and asks him what's wrong. Nolan explains how he's still torn. He says he understands that Viltrumites are a plague, responsible for wiping out countless species across the universe, but he's still dealing with the cognitive dissonance of now turning on his own kind and engineering their extinction. Allen says that Viltrumites had a chance to choose a different path, to see their entire species almost killed by the Scourge virus, and realize how others must have felt when the Viltrumites arrived to conquer other worlds. But the Viltrumites didn't choose to recognize this, and instead doubled down. He also hugs Nolan, who's still not on board with joining the war. The team returns to Telescria to update Thetus, Talia explaining that scientists are extracting and amplifying the beetle shell poison, while a team has been sent back to make a new solar disk, with plans to return and collect the Ragnar later. Tech Jacket is also brought up, and Battle Beast is being looked for at any known conflict zone in the Coalition's reach. Thetis also informs them that the space racer is eager to join their cause, and Allen and Talia are sent home, while Nolan and Thetis talk privately. Thetis asks Nolan if he thinks all this is enough to stop the Empire, to which Nolan says he doesn't actually think so. He believes the conquered races within the Empire will fight for them out of fear. Thetis explains this is why they need Nolan and Mark, to turn the tides in their favor, and give Mark a chance to save his world, since the Viltrumites will be coming for it sooner or later. Nolan says he can't go back to Earth after what he's done, but Thetis believes that they all must face judgment for their past if the future is to be any different, and that he will lead by example, letting Nolan judge him for his sins. Thetis then reveals to Nolan that he is the creator of the Scourge virus, making him the man who caused the near extinction of their species. Not only that, but he's made a stronger version of the virus, one that no Viltrumite is likely to survive if exposed to. Nolan then grabs Thetis by the neck, asking if he knew how many people he would kill. Thetis says he had no idea billions were dead until Nolan arrived, but that the Empire has killed billions before. Having confessed his greatest sins, Thetis says he understands if Nolan wants to kill him, but Nolan instead holds back, asking why he would do something so terrible after already killing Emperor Argal. Thetis explains he expected that putting an end to Argal's cruel leadership would make their people change, but it only made their hate stronger. After this, he saw no other way but to act again, and since he's released the Scourge virus, he's contemplated taking his own life for what he's done, but doesn't have the strength to do it until his entire race is extinct. Nolan makes Thetis promise the virus is a last resort, and he does promise that it'll only be used if there's no other way to take down the Empire. This is the push that Nolan needed to join the cause, and to head back to Earth to get Mark, to try and end the war before the Scourge virus needs to be released. End of episode. In the comic, the conversation first begins with talk of Nolan finally getting his own place to stay, no longer having to deal with Allen and Talia's sex drive, before Nolan is the one to bring up his concerns that their efforts won't be enough. Thetis shares this concern and tells Nolan that he wasn't completely unaware of the genocide that took place on Viltrum, because he was the one who created the Scourge virus using his DNA. Thetis then reveals the improved virus to Nolan, explaining that while it could mean suicide for the two of them, it's their last resort if their cause looks lost. Since Nolan is already on board from the jump in the comic, there's none of the conflict we see throughout the episode with Nolan joining or Mark getting involved, and the issue just ends with Thetis explaining he won't hesitate to do what's necessary to win. We now reach the post-credits scene, where Conquest arrives to report his failure to Grand Regent Thrag. He's forced to his knees and says his arrogance led to his defeat by the hands of Invincible and his witch, which is Eve. Conquest then asks to be killed painfully so others can learn from his death. His masochistic request is denied, however, Thrag saying he won't reward failure, and that Conquest still has work to do. And now is when we're finally shown Thrag for the first time in the show. This scene is pulled from the middle of Invincible Returns. Conquest hasn't yet gotten another robotic arm, and also begs for his life instead of begging to be killed. There's also exposition that explains what's about to happen in the next issue, while the show keeps it vague to give us suspense. With that, we've ended the adaptation of issue 67, meaning in 2 episodes we've covered a grand total of 5 issues. Moving on to episode 3, we get probably the most filler to date, only adapting a grand total of 5 pages from issue 71, with little bits of previously not adapted scenes from issue 70 scattered throughout, along with the reimagining of a plot from a catch-up comic between issues 70 and 71. We start with the scene of Titan meeting Machine Head at a bar. Machine Head is Titan's former crime boss who refused to let him and his family leave his ranks peacefully, only eventually being stopped by the Guardians and Invincible, with Titan taking over his role as crime boss, and in the process defying the Order, a global criminal organization that Machine Head was a member of. Last season, Mr. Liu, leader of the Order and host of a dragon spirit, came to Titan, demanding he help break his man Multipaw out of Peyton Pen, which is in Titan's jurisdiction. Titan pretends to comply with this demand, only to break Machine Head out to assassinate Liu, so he can take the leadership position of the Order in exchange for leaving Titan out of it. Machine Head arranged this meeting to inform Titan that Liu is actually alive. We as viewers seeing in a post-credit scene that Mr. Great Wall of China survived falling out of the sky, and later did something that brings Liu back. Machine Head says that as the leader of the Order, he doesn't really have to worry, but that Titan will be on Liu's hit list. He uses that fact to invite Titan back into the Order, saying his spot is still open, and if he rejoins, him and his family will be safe. Titan isn't willing to give up his freedom he fought so hard for back to Machine Head, and declines the offer. We then cut to Cecil and Donald reviewing the footage of Invincible killing Russ Livingston, Donald noting that Cecil would have done the same. Cecil explains that it's different since Mark could destroy half the planet if he wanted to, and the two talk about how Angstrom and Conquest were warning signs of Mark choosing more absolute solutions, and that trauma like what Mark's been through breaks people. This is an adaptation of a few panels from issue 70, Cecil definitely seeing the incident as a problem, but not as big of a problem as part of Houston being covered in sequids that still need to be cleaned up, so he puts Invincible on the back burner. We then cut to the show-only scene of D.A. Sinclair working on the Invincible Reanimen. After the Invincible War last season, Cecil scooped up all the corpses and began having Sinclair try and get them up and running, getting nowhere close by the time Conquest showed up, and this scene is supposed to show he feels bad about what he's done, originally starting his research by kidnapping college kids and mutilating them. Now he's been given a second chance to make up for his sins, his technology being used on dead soldiers to help save lives. They also fuck up how a welding mask works here. On any half-decent mask, your eyes are visible until you start welding. Then it darkens. We cut to what's technically an adapted scene that finishes up issue 70, starting with a show-only conversation where Robot argues that what Invincible did in the Sequid fight was wrong. Bulletproof doesn't agree, and Monster Girl says that they should be happy that the Sequids are gone and hit the showers. Brett also chastised Robot for not following orders, telling him he'll never go in the field again if he disobeys another order. Robot then goes off to take a shower before coughing up a whole ass Sequid, the same way we saw Russ do back in season 2 episode 6, and the same way the invasion on Earth managed to happen. Robot tries to call for help, but his throat is shot from spitting the thing up, and before it grabs onto him, Monster Monster Girl crushes it. She asks where it came from and he explains, saying he never even felt it inside of him. Robot says it was luck that kept another outbreak from happening, and that they shouldn't be relying on luck, listing the Sequids, Angstrom, Doc Seismic, always returning stronger than before. And one of these days, luck won't be enough. The two start to realize that Mark is probably right about more permanent solutions, and this idea will come up later in the episode. Like I said, this adapts a page out of issue 70. After the Sequid fight, Robot and Monster Girl discuss Mark murdering Russ, before Monster Girl tells Robot he smells like shit from the sewer and to go take a shower. In the shower, he spits up not one, but two Sequids, kills them both, and lightheartedly proclaims that at long last the Sequid threat is finally over. In the show, they made it much more dramatic, and his reaction is way more serious than in the comic, bringing it back around with the idea that maybe Mark is right about permanent solutions. We now cut to Mark, post-Sequid fight, quite shaken up by what he's done. Mark tries to contact Eve, but she's not responding, and we're shown her in a field attempting to use her powers in different ways, none of which work for very long before turning into goo. Mark leaves Eve a voicemail before getting a knock on the door from Donald, who tells him Cecil would like a word. Then we get another little scene of Paul coming to Debbie with a place he thinks would be nice for them to move in together, if they both sold their houses. She's hesitant, and that's it. We then move to a scene in some park, Titan out with his wife and daughter, the entire place crawling with security. Suddenly, they all start getting decapitated by sheets of metal, and after they're all down, Titan is directly attacked. We see the one responsible, and get the TV debut of a character I feared we'd never see, Magnetak, who says Mr. Liu sends his regards. Magnetak was originally seen in Invincible issue 19, as part of Machine Head's roster of villains brought in to defend him. His design is extremely dated. My guess is they were going for some sort of early Iron Man vibes, while his powers of controlling metal are obviously inspired by Magneto. In the show, he looks way more like Shredder from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He doesn't show up in the main Invincible comic but for a single fight, but does make a handful of appearances and spin-offs like Invincible Universe and Guarding the Globe. This fight isn't the worst thing in the world, mostly consisting of separated running shots, while Magnetak launches parts of his suit at Titan. There are a few fun moments, like when the fight starts, Titan is initially focused on dodging. That's until Magnetak uses his evasive maneuvers to instead try and target his wife and daughter. They're luckily not hit, and from that moment on, Titan begins tanking the hits more instead of trying to dodge all of them. Magnetak also tries to yeet most of his suit at Titan, which doesn't work, and while attempting to pull some plates back, Titan purposely gets hit by one of them to launch himself at Magnetak. While beating the shit out of him on the ground, Magnetak tries to finish off Titan's wife and daughter, and I was really worried they were actually gonna do it, but Isotope steps in and saves them at the last second, now leaving only Titan and Magnetak, the worst matchup of all time. Titan just goes to town until Magnetak is dead, and the scene ends, with this missing comic book villain's first appearance turning into his last. We cut to another show-only scene of Debbie getting home and looking at the house a bit, telling Oliver he's grown up so much, and that they've been through a lot in such a small amount of time. Oliver mentions that Mark has been sad the majority of the time nowadays and misses how he used to be. Debbie says that you can't fight change and you just have to support the ones you love while they deal with it. The closest this adapts is a page in issue 70 where Oliver is having a conversation with his tutor April, who's basically the only human Oliver cares about outside the family in the comics. They discuss his growth rate, and then Mark gets home and goes up to his room to sulk. April isn't the most prominent in the comics, being introduced in issue 35 and having 7 appearances throughout, with this page of issue 70 being the last time we see her. In the show, we haven't seen her but for a split second near the end of season 3, watching the Invincible War from inside a GDA site of some sort. We then cut to the Pentagon, where Mark is getting a talking to by Cecil. He says he would have done the same thing if put in Mark's position against Russ Livingston, believing that as an astronaut, Russ knew the risks of the career he was getting into. Mark asks why he's there if that's what Cecil thinks, and Cecil says that actually killing Russ is not like Mark at all, and that when it comes to making those kinds of hard decisions, for people like the Guardians, he takes that burden upon himself so they can sleep at night, saying he gave up sleep years ago. See the goo explanation from earlier. Cecil wants Mark to give the burden of making the decision to kill to him, or at least come to him if he's ever in a situation like that again. But Mark says he's not a kid anymore and doesn't need Cecil to handle him. But Cecil rebuts by saying if he didn't try to handle the strongest person on the planet, he'd not be doing his job. This is a conversation that doesn't take place in the main comic line, but instead in the catch-up issue Invincible Returns, taking place between issues 70 and 71. Cecil explains that he's afraid of what Mark's capable capable of and his willingness to fight whenever he believes he's in the right. He then asks what would happen if Mark ever decided he was the only one fit to rule the planet. Mark tries to rebut this point by arguing it's a leap in logic compared to where he's currently at, that being, some enemies are a big enough threat that it justifies killing. Sinclair's team is told that Invincible is here and that they need to cover up the zombie versions of him and take a lunch to stay out of his path. Sinclair instead decides that he feels so bad about what he did in the past that he barges into Cecil's office while he's talking to Mark, in an effort to apologize. Sinclair says he'd apologize directly to those he hurt if he thought it wouldn't do more harm than good. Mark doesn't really want to hear any of this, telling Sinclair to never speak to him again. After Sinclair leaves, Cecil explains that his reanimen have saved more people than most heroes do in their entire career, and that even after seeing what Invincible did to Russ, Sinclair still came to apologize. In the Returns comic, this scene plays out differently, Cecil first hiding the Invincible reanimen that Mark is not yet aware of in the comics, before using Sinclair as an example of a time Mark was wrong. He did horrible things to develop his technology, Sinclair even explaining that he did those things because he thought what he was doing was right, and that the ends justified the means. He was driven mad by the idea that he was right, but now he regrets his actions, is reformed, and is even engaged to Justine, as we learn her name is, the fellow GDA scientist we usually see Sinclair with. The two are also expecting a child. Mark is skeptical, believing wrongly that the timing was just too perfect, and that Cecil must have planned for Sinclair to come in during their conversation. He asks if he's allowed to leave, and Cecil says yes. Mark flies off instantly and is gone, but Cecil sees this as a win, since this time he didn't crash through the ceiling. Donald asks if Cecil is going to tell Mark about Conquest, to which Cecil says if Donald wants his job that bad, he could just ask. This is also in Returns, but instead of flying off because he's done with the conversation, Invincible is called to New York to handle a threat of some sort, one that's going to be adapted shortly. And Cecil goes into more detail about why he doesn't want to tell Invincible about Conquest, trying to work him back to the GDA's side, because he doesn't believe someone as strong as him running alone is a good idea. We get another show-only scene where Mark talks to Eve about her powers failing, her explaining that she's too scared to even fly at this point. Mark says Robot fixed Monster Girl's powers, so they should go ask him immediately. Eve then gets a phone call for Invincible Inc., but Mark says he can't right now, and someone else is going to have to take care of it. Eve asks what happened, and Mark explains that he killed Russ, and Cecil covered it up. Eve is pretty understanding when she hears this and says she'll call other groups to try to handle it. This is when Oliver chimes in, explaining that he'd be willing to help, asking how much he'll be getting paid. We're shown in the next scene that this is where it ties back into Titan and Liu's story. The fight between Liu and Titan happens in Returns, but it's much different than how the show will adapt it. Titan has called for Invincible's help in putting Liu in his place, especially after he's been found in an abandoned apartment complex by Isotope. Isotope also suggests they just go back into the Order so they have nothing to worry about, an idea he quickly withdraws the moment it pisses off Titan. When Oliver arrives, Titan says there's no deal without Invincible, but Oliver says he can do whatever Invincible can, and an agreement is reached to protect his family. In the comic, the idea of Oliver working for Invincible comes up in issue 68, just before we get to see his new costume. The first time we see him working for Invincible Inc. is during the world-ending catastrophe that's about to happen. While Invincible went to handle that, Oliver dealt with the Lizard League in a shopping mall. We then cut to another show-only scene of Robot trying to figure out what's wrong with Eve's powers, saying all of his scans show she's fine, before the two are distracted by a beeping sound. They realize it's the device Robot made back in season 1 to detect Flaxon attacks, and so begins the fourth Flaxon invasion. This time, instead of just killing everyone, they're also taking prisoners, attaching collars around their necks that link them into a chain gang. On the way there, we're given a recap of the previous attacks and the current situation, including that without devices of some sort, the Flaxons age rapidly while they're in our dimension, their dimension's time moving differently than Earth's. By the second time they invaded, they had wristbands to protect them from Earth's time stream, and by the third time, they had somehow developed an immunity to this through some unknown means, but were stopped by the overwhelming strength of Omni-Man, who then went to their dimension and blew up their civilization, telling them Earth wasn't theirs to conquer. Well, now they're back, and they'd already been immune to the time stream, so it's probably not looking good. Though to be honest, the real thing that's not looking good is the scale of this fight. What in the fuck is this? In the best shot we get of the entire battlefield, there's a fraction of the enemies we saw in season 1. The budget definitely didn't go here, that's for sure. And get this fight is actually canon to the comics, and pretty important, being the third invasion and setting up for events later. In the show, this is the fourth invasion, the third not being present in the comics, and when going back to season 1, looked way larger. I understand you probably can't make it look like the comics, with everyone basically surfing on top of waves of enemies, but you can do better than this, because we've seen in the past they have done better than this. It doesn't matter those are 3D models, and that you can tell half of them are the same if you zoom in. This looks like an alien invasion, goddammit. We also get 2 of these flying drone things that Robot said were probably made to fight Omni-Man, and they start running Mark's Fade pretty hard, which is kinda dumb to be frank. In the comic, they have these mechs as well, but they aren't much more of a burden as the rest of the Endless Forces. We're also told by Donald that there are thousands of these guys, and more on the way every minute via carrier. But in the best shot I could find, you can only count like 75 max. They're also struggling with a way bigger roster that includes Monster Girl and Brit, who are pretty much immune to all this bullshit. I will say, I do enjoy the part where they throw a grenade of some sort. Brit tells everyone to get down and jumps on it. Canonically, he's indestructible, so he tanks the hit, but is sent flying into a building. We cut to Oliver flying Titan to fight Liu, who's looking pretty bad off after taking a bullet to the head last season. When Oliver actually sees Liu, he says there's no way he'd fight an old guy, and then Liu turns into the dragon that he heard almost killed Mark last season. Titan fights Liu's bodyguard while Oliver is resigned to running away, not really standing a chance even while Liu is in a weakened state, making the dragon weaker. He calls Eve for Mark's help, but is told he's busy, we know with the Flaxon invasion, and told to just run. We then cut back to the very underwhelming Flaxon invasion, where Monster Girl apparently needs to be saved. Look at this shit, come on. Robot has scanned the entire battlefield and is unable to locate the signal that keeps the Flaxons from aging, so he assumes it's somewhere through the portal, asking Monster Girl if she trusts him before they both make a beeline for it. Upon reaching the other side, they discover the source of the signal, a giant speaker-looking thing, and while Monster Girl frees civilians, Robot blows the signal emitters up. This causes the army to begin aging rapidly, ending the fight, and as they all rush to the portal, Robot peers over to find more tanks and soldiers ready to fight, and a pretty rebuilt civilization in the background. This leads him to decide they need to find a more permanent solution to the Flaxons, and he tells everyone they should try to defeat them in their own dimension. Cecil is against this idea, but everyone else is on board and begins rushing the portal. The only reason they don't make it to join Monster Girl and Robot is because of a lone Flaxon who sacrifices himself to destroy the portal, cutting him in half and leaving Monster Girl and Robot trapped in their dimension. In the comic, this fight plays out differently in issue 71. For one, there is no question that the overwhelming numbers are a problem, but they still aren't putting a dent in any of the heroes fighting them. Monster Girl, Bulletproof, Brit, Invincible, even Robot isn't phased. It's about the numbers and trying to figure out how they're immune to the time stream to stop it. They figure out it's the tank emitting the signal. After they begin retreating, Robot says they need to stop them at the source, but no one else is chomping at the bit to run in with him but Monster Girl. The portal closes and that's the end of it. In both the show and the comic, no traces are left behind to figure out how to make a portal to their dimension, and contact with Robot and Monster Girl is cut. Mark has been informed on Oliver's status and we see he's looking pretty bad off. In the comic, he talks to Eve mid-fight, saying he can't make it to a Lizard League attack on a mall, and Oliver is sent in with no trouble. While in the show, Oliver is about tapped out, hiding from the dragon, while Titan has his hands full with the bodyguard. Just as the dragon finds Oliver, Mark arrives to save him, asking why he stayed instead of running. Oliver explaining that he didn't want to do a bad job while representing Eve and Mark. The two team up to take down the dragon, and now being overwhelmed by a much stronger and prepared Invincible, Liu and his bodyguard retreat. They begin to give chase before Titan yells that this fight between him and Liu isn't over. Mark, seeing the dude who nearly got him killed like twice, begins going to town on him, drawing a large amount of blood before Oliver is able to stop him. That's not any way to treat a client, Mark. We're supposed to be getting the vibe that Mark was ready to kill Titan here, playing into the darker tendencies he's had lately. We then get a little scene of Oliver being patched up, and Eve updating Mark on her attempts to figure out what's wrong with her powers. Then we move on to another show-only scene, where Machine Head sits as the head of the Order. I actually have names for you this time. This is War Woman 2, taking the title after War Woman's death, Insomniac, Face, The Walking Dread, Slaying Mantis, and Red Eye. These guys show up and actually do stuff in the Guarding the Globe spinoff. Machine Head says he has a surprise and introduces Titan as a member of the Order, making sure that everyone understands that while there might be a history between the two of them, they're both part of the Order, and no one fucks with each other once they're in the Order. This is a setup for Machine Head to reveal that not only is Titan a returning member of the Order, but Liu Stu too has been invited back, and accepted to avoid further conflict. Realizing they've both been played by Machine Head, there's not really much that can be done, and it's implied that Isotope was in on it as well, believing it just made sense for them to return to the Order. End of episode. Post credits. Mark wakes up, finding Eve isn't in bed. He sees the bathroom light is on and goes to check, only for the door to be slammed shut on him. Eve says she'll come back to bed in a minute, and we finally get the reveal that she's pregnant, explaining why her powers have been on the fritz. This scene adapts the last 2 pages of issue 68, in which Mark knocks on the door asking Eve why she's taking so long, especially since she sorta left her pants in the room and his mom's gonna be home any minute, and he doesn't really want it to be that obvious what they've been up to. She tells Mark to go away, and he apologizes for bothering her. Before we're shown, she's come back positive on a pregnancy test. The show really dragged this one out much further, with the comic only having Mark's clothes being messed up, indicating that her powers were on the fritz before we learn she's pregnant. We don't even see the Universa fight yet. That happens an issue later. In the show, they make it more of a what's wrong with Eve thing before the reveal. And now we move on to the lowest rated episode of Invincible to date, and the one with the least adapted content, with not a single issue of the main Invincible comic adapted. In fact, the only thing brought from the main line for this show only conflict is a single character, who appeared once, much later down the line, and was forgotten about for lack of time, though there are side scenes being pulled from Invincible Returns. We start with Mark coming to Art, where they discuss him almost killing Titan last episode, explaining how he felt so ready to do it, barely even thinking about it, and that he believes himself to have turned into his father. Art tells him he's nowhere close to his father, evidenced by the fact that Nolan never came in to talk about how almost taking a life was eating away at him, and that shows Mark is different. Mark tries to give back his suit, saying he doesn't deserve it, but Art believes he's still the same kid that came in years ago looking to make the world a better place. The world just isn't as cooperative as he'd hoped it'd be. Art says he can't turn back time, but when he's ready to remember who he really is, he's able to make Mark look the part, with his original suit ready to go. This is when Mark gets a call from Eve, who says he's needed on another mission. This adapts a scene from Returns, where in the same manner, Mark comes into Art's shop, after almost killing Titan. The conversation is very similar, though in the comic, Art defends Nolan, believing him to be a good man, and that the acts he committed aren't the full picture of who he really is. While in the show, Art is nowhere near on board with Nolan. The scene ends with Mark receiving the 3rd iteration of his suit, but in the show, we need to drag that shit out, sticking an entire non-existent story between the 2 pages. And now we get to the random hell story featuring Satan and Glup Shido, otherwise known as Volcanica, who's fighting against demons with the same creatures Doc Seismic was controlling back in season 3, Magma Knights. In a location we can guess is hell, because Damien Darkblood, Demon Detective, is here. We last saw him in season 1 of the show, investigating Omni-Man's murder of the Guardians. When he got too close to the truth, Cecil exorcised him back to hell, to prevent Damien from revealing to the world what he was already aware of, before he could figure out why Nolan killed the Guardians. Damien says they should have waited and tried another conjuring spell, while his sister calls him a coward. They then begin fighting the Magma Knights, as Volcanica monologues about how futile their efforts are, and that the Infernal Throne is rightfully hers. We get a bunch of budget-saving silhouette shots as everyone is overwhelmed. They then get the upper hand, only for it to be lost moments later, as Damien is grabbed and his armor is burned through by Volcanica's claws. He's saved by his sister, and the two prepare to fight again. In mid-monologue, they start tearing into Volcanica. She starts mustering up the strength to tear some of the demons apart, ending with Damien's sister, who we learn is named Domina, being taken out by a lava fist to the mouth. It's extremely gross looking, not a fan. She leaves Damien alive to tell Satan he's lost and that she's taking over. Damien picks up his still alive sister's head and says sorry, before cutting to him dragging a bag of their guts away, drawing a circle to summon who we now know is Satan. He instead steps out of the shadows, saying he doesn't need to be summoned. He could hear the fighting and knows that Darkblood was defeated. Satan explains their situation grows more dire, and Damien's plans have only led to failure. Damien opens the bag of gore left from the fight, his sister's still alive head falling out. Satan prepares to restore them to fight again, but Damien stops him, saying that they'll just fail again, and instead he wants to try a summoning ritual one last time, to bring someone from Earth to help. This someone is Omni-Man, and Damien has been using blood he obtained from Nolan's fight with the Guardians to try and summon him to help defeat Volcanica. He instead decides to widen the parameters of the spell on this last attempt, and is able to pull down Invincible, who happened to be mid-mission inside Kahor's tomb. A long-running joke in the TV show, beginning in season 1, Cahor tried to possess a man to leave his tomb, and is accidentally stopped by Invincible while he's flying overhead, causing a sandstorm that seals him inside. Then in season 2, the daughter of the man possessed brings her superpowered girlfriend to help get in the tomb, where they find her father dead of malnutrition, and Cahor, unable to leave his tomb without a host, refuses to use either of the two females, and is left stuck there with them. He shows up again during the Invincible War in season 3, attempting to possess an alternate mark, but he's not fast enough and the mark gets away, causing him to scurry back while the girls escape. It appears this woman tried to access the tomb once again, and that Invincible was mid-fight with Cahor before being summoned to Hell, leaving the superpowered woman, known as Riley, alone in the tomb. Cahor decides to stoop down to possessing a female, and after 4 seasons, he's finally free, though he's left to walk to wherever he's going, since Invincible flew Riley there, and another open thread is left for later. Like I said, this is a show-only gag, and nothing like it exists in the comic. Some people compare this to a comic character called Anipetus, but I disagree. Anipetus was actually getting somewhere the 2 times he popped up, while Cahor's entire bit is not being able to leave his tomb, while accidentally being foiled in his efforts to do so. Anyways, back to Hell. Invincible has been summoned, because while Nolan isn't on Earth, he shares his blood, so the widened parameters grabbed him instead. Mark recognizes Damien Darkblood and asks where they are. Damien explains they're in the underworld, which humans call Hell, and that the imp in front of him is Satan. Mark immediately assumes he's supposed to fight Satan, only to be stopped before a blow is thrown. Damien then spends, I shit you not, 5 entire minutes explaining the lore of Hell to Mark, while they sit on a ledge overlooking lava pits. This is all lore I can summarize in a couple sentences. Hell is real, but in reality it's just inside the earth, and demons are actually protecting the planet from the return of the Vile. Creatures we can guess are similar to titans in Greek mythology, big monsters that want to eat everybody. They showed up in the 4th age of existence, while humans sprouted up during the 6th age, and the Vile are kept imprisoned in the underworld by demons torturing them forever after banishing them there during the 5th age. Volcanica hates humans and has been waging war against demons, preventing them from torturing the Vile, in hopes of freeing them to destroy the surface. Mark mopes a bit cause he's still upset about the whole killing Russ thing, but eventually decides to help, saying he won't do any killing. Satan says his men will handle the fighting, all Mark needs to do is help him get back to his former glory. To do this, Mark and Damien need to find Satan's molten crown, that has been tossed into a bottomless pit. This is why they need Mark, because no one in Hell is capable of retrieving the crown from said pit. Damien also explains he was expecting Omni-Man, and that he believed he could convince him to help out of self-interest. He can't conquer the planet if it's destroyed by the Vile. The two jump down the not actually bottomless pit, which we're told has a great beast they'll need to fight once they reach the ground. We then have a 3-minute long scene of them falling down the hole. I wish I was kidding. During the fall, Mark asks if there's a heaven, and Damien says they have no idea, but he doesn't think there's some sort of balance like what humans believe there to be, and that they should try to turn Earth into heaven instead. Then there's this very long gag about him taking the helmet off and putting it back on, and if it's demon nanotech. This feels like I'm watching an episode of Naruto filler, holy shit. They get to the bottom and find the crown, but it's protected by Cerberus, who used to protect the entrance to Hell, and after being defeated by Volcanica, was tossed down the hole. They begin to fight Cerberus, but after one hit, Mark doesn't think Damien can handle it, so he throws him back up the hole, promising to catch him again. We then get another entire minute of Damien Darkblood flying back up the hole, before falling back down. Invincible does catch him, says he defeated Cerberus, and has Satan's crown. The craziest budget cutting I've ever seen, guys. While returning to Satan, Damien notes the wailing usually heard from the lava has stopped, meaning the Vile will be recovering any time. They get to Satan, and Mark throws the crown to him. To buy us another couple seconds, I guess, Damien freaks out in slow motion, before the crown is caught by Satan. Damien then explains that it's very fragile, which is stupid, because it got tossed down a bottomless fucking pit. What do you mean it's fragile? Satan puts the crown on while monologuing, transforming into his strengthened form, while metal music begins playing. And then we get another talking scene on the ledge. Mark's still big sad about having to do small bad to stop big bad. Damien says sometimes you gotta do small bad to protect from big bad, like demons torturing the Vile to protect the surface. He then asks for Mark's help defeating Volcanica, and Mark agrees. The Darkblood clan is restored, all but his sister, who bestows the family axe to Damien, saying their father always wanted him to have it. Then all-out demon combat begins. Satan and the Darkbloods fight against Volcanica and her Magma Knights. Damien tells Mark to get Satan to Volcanica because her fall will cause the rest to follow. He tries flying Satan in, then begins taking down the Magma Knights, to give the Dark Bloods the room they need to help. All while heavy metal music plays, by the way. Their efforts appear to work until Volcanica encases 2 Dark Bloods in rock, melts one of their faces off, then yoinks the family axe to kill Damien. The axe, however, just fucks off, flying into a lava fall, never elaborated on. Satan tries to flank her and is stabbed through, left completely immobilized, and Volcanica begins monologuing again about how this is all part of her plan to get Satan, give them a little hope of victory so he'd come out of hiding. Seeing the situation has reached a point of hopelessness, Invincible steps in, saying he can't let her take over Earth. She begins to speak again before having her head punched clean off, freeing Satan and saving Damien. Turns out though, she can't be killed and her head grows right back. So he punches it off again and then kicks it off. And then she runs off, realizing she's defeated, pledging to come back later. One vial is also able to work its way out of the lava, but Invincible punches it back in and Satan tells his men to continue their torture before more escape. Hela is back in the control of Satan and Damien is allowed to head back up to the surface for repaying his debt to Satan. This was the most nothing burger story we've seen so far, and it makes sense people would be annoyed with it. I'm gonna be honest, on my first watch, I fell asleep. Sue me. What some people get wrong though is the nature of this story being completely original or something planned but cut from the comic. This confusion comes from a Robert Kirkman quote explaining that he wanted to do a hero goes to hell story, something a lot of comic book characters get in some form or another. But this was not the same story he originally planned to tell. How do I know this? Because A, Damien was never banished in the comics. It was a joke character who didn't discover Omni-Man was the killer till long after everyone already knew Nolan had left the planet. B, Volcanica is an actual character in the comic. She doesn't appear until issue 106 and is completely written out, never to be seen again after issue 107. Volcanica is the self-proclaimed ruler of Underworld, a place deep in the Earth's crust where another villain, Doc Seismic, was conjuring beasts from, using his earthquake gloves. He used them in issue 36 and again in issue 48, successfully capturing most heroes by doing so, something we also saw adapted in season 3. Well, sometime after this, he's captured by Volcanica, who's impressed by his ability to communicate with the creatures of the underworld, and rewards his efforts by melting his fucking skin off and turning him into whatever this guy is. Volcanica and Doc Seismic then try and take over the surface, using more underworld creatures. They're defeated though, and the issue ends with them vowing to return. And then they never return. There are no other appearances of Volcanica. Not in the main comic, not in any of the spin-offs, nothing. She was cut out, probably due to more important stories, but definitely had nothing to do with Hell, instead being tied into Doc Seismic's crusty adventures with the underworld magma creatures. Honestly, I thought this episode was pretty lazy, and it was obviously an excuse for Kirkman to work with Bruce Campbell, of Evil Dead fame, who voiced Satan. We move to a scene of Eve telling William, Mark's gay best friend, that she's pregnant. Before we get into it, first, the fuck is that photorealistic brick wall? Second, William's voice actor has been swapped out, from Andrew Rannells to Brandon Scott Jones. I actually just did a video on Fiona and Cake Season 2, go watch it, it's great, and his role as Gary was also recast. From the research I've done, no one is 100% certain why he's been recast, but the dude's a major theater kid and has like 10 different Broadway related things going on right now, so that's probably why. So in this scene, Eve tells William she isn't ready to have a kid, and that this was unplanned, happening even after her and Mark had been using protection. She says she wants kids eventually, but isn't ready for one right now. This conversation also occurs in the Returns catch-up issue, though Eve actually explains further that she doesn't know if Mark would make a good father, him having to be a hero and all. She knows he couldn't just stop doing that, so he'd be unreliable as a parent. This explanation is kind of stupid though, considering that Omni-Man was a perfect parent while also defending the entire planet, until he did that thing. And now we return to Mark grabbing his costume, switching back to his old design and colors, and flying around and stuff. Like I said earlier, this is pulled from the catch-up issue, though in that, he actually switches to a different costume than his original. This one has full gloves and no knee pads, things Art removed when making the black and blue design. In the show, his fingies have always been out, but we also don't ever see this version of the costume, instead moving straight back to his original design, which in the comic will happen in issue 79. We get another show-only scene where Debbie tells the boys she plans to sell the house and move into a place with Paul, where they're both welcome to live as long as they'd like. Mark is not super on board about this, this but accepts it, especially if it makes his mother happy. He goes up to the roof and tells Eve about hell and how he's not really okay after everything that's happened to him, but that he'll get there. In returns, this conversation is about Mark's return to form and the little changes Art made to the suit, as well as his return to not killing, deciding it's the easy way out when dealing with enemies. This was the point of Mark being in the blue and black suit, representing a darker tone for his character, and his return to yellow and blue was supposed to represent a shift back to how he used to be. In both the show and the comic, Eve is about to tell Mark she's pregnant, but they're interrupted by Nolan and Allen arriving, telling Mark he needs to come with them to help fight in the war. In the comic, however, Eve is the one that spots them, while in the show it's Mark. A post-credit scene then shows Damien back on the surface, getting messages from Satan to find out what humans did that pissed off Volcanica, who's been asleep for millennia before this. It's possible that maybe that'll have something to do with Doc Seismic later. And with that, we've reached the end of this video, covering the first 4 episodes of the season. This video should be released before the finale of season 4, and after that's out, you'll be able to find the second part on the channel shortly. But until then, go check out my other videos breaking down movies and TV shows, or you can find me streaming on Twitch every night around 7:30 MST. If you enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and have a good day.